सलाम, नमस्ते, सत श्री अकाल। जुगनू नामा में आपको एक नया जाविया पेश करेंगे, उर्दू, अंग्रेजी, पंजाबी तीनों जबानों में। लाइक और सब्सक्राइब करना मत भूलिएगा। Hello and welcome. We are very honored today to have Professor Avi Shlaim with us. He is a distinguished historian who has an expert view on the Israel-Palestine conflict. He has taught international relations and history at Oxford for many years. He is emeritus professor at St. Anthony's College. Professor Shlaim, if I may introduce you to our readers as uniquely positioned to talk about the subject at hand, which is the Israel-Palestine conflict and what the future holds. Because you are from a distinguished Jewish family, born in Baghdad in Iraq, and you lived there for some years before you moved with your family to Israel. You are a native Arab speaker, and you consider yourself a son of the Arab soil.
Absolutely correct. A couple of years ago, I published an autobiography under the title 3 Words, Memoirs of an Arab Jew. And the 3 words of the title are Baghdad, where I lived with my family for the first 5 years of my life. Then the second word is Israel, where I went to school from the age of 5 to 15. And the third world is London, where I went to school from 15 to 18. But what is significant is that I now define myself as an Arab Jew. And the term Arab Jew is very controversial in Israel, but I insist that it's up to me to define my original identity, and I see myself as an Arab Jew, and I'm proud of being Jewish, and I'm proud of my Arab heritage as well, and I see no contradiction.
Indeed, Professor, and I just want to say that you have also published seminal works which have been illuminating for us all: Israel and Palestine, the Iron Wall, and most recently, genocide in Gaza. For that, we thank you. Could I just start with a look at history and what commentators speak of as Israel's claim to the land, starting with the Canaan city-states, going on to the kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and then the expulsion of large numbers of Jews by the Romans, let's say 1900, 2000 years ago. As an Arab Jew, how does that history bolster for you the claim of Israel to that land?
Israel, in my opinion, has no claim to the land of Palestine. What happened 2.5 millennia ago is not relevant today. Today, what matters is international law. The only borders that Israel has that are recognized by international law are the armistice lines of 1949, armistice agreements that were negotiated between Israel and all its neighbors under UN auspices in the aftermath of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The only borders that Israel has that I consider to be legitimate. Now, the Israeli claim to sovereignty over the whole of historic Palestine is connected with the Bible. And the irony is that the founding fathers of Zionism were all secular Jews. Yet it suited them to exploit Judaism for their own purpose. So they didn't believe in God, but they turned God into a land agent who allocated Palestine to the Jews. The founding fathers of the State of Israel were socialists, David Ben-Gurion and his colleagues.
Correct.
And the ruling party in Israel was the Labour Party and the Socialist Party. But nationalism was dominant. To my students at Oxford, I used to set a question, assess the relative importance of socialism and nationalism in the making of modern Israel. And if they said it's a bit of both, they got a very low mark.
I see.
The correct answer is that nationalism has always been the dominant force. And if there was a clash between the claims of socialism and the claims of nationalism, nationalism always prevailed. And to this day, the Labour Party is a Zionist party and a nationalist party.
So if I may take you to the Balfour Declaration of 1917, Professor, where the British Empire colluded with the Zionist project, inserted this idea as a claim into the United Nations Charter. So from the get-go, it was an imperialist project and it was a settler colonial project. And everything that has followed since then seems to flow from that. Am I wrong?
You're 100% right. And I'll say something that may surprise you, and that is that the current war in Gaza is a direct result of the Balfour Declaration.
Correct.
The Balfour Declaration was issued by Britain, and it pledged support for a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, a euphemism for a Jewish state. And in 1917, the Jews were 10% of the population, and they owned 2% of the land. The Arabs were 90%, and yet Britain allocated national rights to the Jews and denied it to the Arab majority. So it was a classic colonial document which completely disregarded the rights and aspirations of the majority of the people. And to add insult to injury, the Balfour Declaration described the 90% of the population as the non-Jewish communities in Palestine, as though if you're not Jewish, you're nothing, you're rubbish. And the cornerstone of the British mandate in Palestine up to 1948 was to deny democracy, to deny elections, to deny representative institutions.
Until the Jewish community was in the majority.
Exactly. And the Jewish community only became a majority in 1948 as a result of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, as a result of expelling 750,000 Palestinians.
And what's known as the Nakba.
So I will, this is the Nakba, the catastrophe. 750,000 Palestinians became refugees, and the name Palestine was wiped off the map. And I've written a great deal about British mandate in Palestine, but I can summarize it for you and your listeners in one sentence. It was the history of how Britain stole Palestine from the Palestinians and gave it to the Zionists. And as you said, this is a settler colonial movement. And the logic of settler colonialism is the elimination of the natives. This is what the Zionist movement has been doing. And the Nakba, the catastrophe, wasn't a one-off event. It's a continuing process of displacement and dispossession of the Palestinians, which reached its climax in the war in Gaza, and the ethnic cleansing of the West Bank continues today as we speak.
What was behind this British impulse to deliver the Palestinian lands into the hands of Zionists? I mean, it wasn't for the love of Zionism. It wasn't for the fulfillment of a biblical prophecy. What was it that propelled British imperialism to do this?
It was a misconception that led to the British support for Zionism in the First World War. And Britain was not doing well towards the end of the war, and Britain was desperate for allies anywhere it could find them. So it made conflicting promises to Hussein, the Sharif of Mecca, to create an independent Arab kingdom under his rule in return for mounting an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Turks. He fulfilled his side of the bargain. The British did not. They reneged on their promise. Then there was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, a secret agreement between France and Britain to divide the Middle East into zones of influence. And worse, this was 1916. Worse was to follow. In 1917, Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, pledging support for the Zionist movement in Palestine. Why did Britain make this promise to the Zionists? Because Lloyd George was prime minister, a radical in domestic politics, but an old-fashioned British imperialist and a land grabber when it came to foreign policy.
And therefore no different from Churchill, his counterpart in the Conservative Party.
No different from Churchill, who was also an ardent Zionist. And Lloyd George thought that the Jews were a uniquely influential people, that they had covert influence, that they controlled international finance, that they were particularly influential in Washington and in Moscow after the Bolshevik Revolution. And therefore, if Britain made this pledge to the Zionists, it would acquire a major strategic ally in the war against Germany. That was his thinking, but it was a mistake. The Jews didn't have covert power. In fact, his whole view of the Jews was anti-Semitic.
Do you see parallels between the creation of Israel in 1948, the creation of Pakistan, my country, in 1947? Again, I think a project overseen by the British Empire.
I see a very close parallel between the partition of India in 1947 and the partition of Palestine. Britain was the imperial power. Britain inherited, after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, one unit, Palestine. And Britain was responsible for the partitioning of Palestine into two halves. Britain realized that the Balfour Declaration was a colossal strategic mistake, that it backed the wrong side. And by 1947, Britain had run of options, so it allowed the UN to vote for the partition of Palestine, which relegated Palestine to warfare, and the stronger side won. So at the end of the mandate, Britain doomed the Arab majority to refugee status and the loss of their country. And there is a clear parallel with India. Britain was in charge. When Britain decided to cut and run, it left behind the partition of India with two communities, Hindus and Muslims, at each other's throats, a civil war. You'd know better than I do the number of casualties in that civil war.
And unresolved disputes, Professor, which fester to this day.
And exactly the same is true of Palestine as well, because of partition. Partition is not a solution. In South Africa, there was an apartheid regime, a white regime. No one suggested that the solution is to create two states, one black and one white.
Correct.
And so partition is not a solution to this conflict.
If South Africa had been more geopolitically important, don't you think they would have partitioned that as well?
It is possible, but that's a speculation. So we will never know what might have happened.
The catastrophic year of 1936, long before the Nakba, but catastrophic nonetheless, when there was an Arab uprising against the takeover of their lands and continued illegal settlements of Zionists, resistance that has continued from the Palestinians since then, what it's been up against, because it's been up against first the Zionists and the British, and then the Zionists, the Israel Project, and the Americans who inherited Britain's imperial power.
Let us start with the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939. It was a revolt because against Britain and its Zionist proteges, because the British allowed unrestricted Jewish immigration to Palestine and land purchases. So the Zionists were gradually taking over the country. That's the background to the revolt. It was a national revolt, and the British Army crushed the revolt with the utmost brutality, and in the process committed a lot of war crimes, like summary executions, arrest, administrative arrest without trial, the burning of villages, the torturing of people,
yes,
deportations. So utmost brutality. And I would argue that Palestine was lost not in the late 1940s, as is commonly believed, but in the late 1930s because of the decisive way in which Britain crushed the Arab resistance. Noam Chomsky once said that settler colonialism is the most extreme and vicious form of imperialism.
Yep.
And the Palestinians have been, for the last century, the Palestinians have been at the receiving end of Zionist settler colonialism on the one hand, and Western imperialism on the other hand, first under Britain and then under America. And without this Western imperial support for Israel, Israel would not have been able to get away with a fraction of the war crimes that it has been committing, most notably over the last 2 years.
In our own country of Pakistan, since we are drawing parallels, there's always been resistance amongst the political class and amongst civil society to the Pakistani states being joined at the hip with the imperialist project, and with the Pakistani state and the Indian state in kind of in at daggers drawn, to the great detriment of both peoples, both in India and in Pakistan. And also there's been a critique of the way the Pakistani state has long dealt with sub-nationalisms within Pakistan, to begin with East Pakistan and then Balochistan and Sindh and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And so I wondered, has there not been any soul searching within Israel?
There's always been resistance within Israel to the Zionist project. And Jews are notoriously disputatious, and there is a very long and honorable tradition of Jewish descent. There was the legacy of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious empire, and it had the one great virtue, which is that it allowed a high degree of civil and religious autonomy to all the minorities, and the Jews, like the other minorities, thrived under the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman framework was much more with open borders, and local autonomy was suited the region much better than the new order imposed by Britain and France after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, where the logic was not pluralism, the logic was nationalism. So in Palestine, you're either a Jew or an Arab, and the conflict was inevitable and inescapable.
Professor, nationalism has been the scourge of the modern world, hasn't it?
Nationalism has been the scar of the modern world.
Correct.
Trouble with nationalism, it stops us thinking. So we don't approach each other as human beings and look at what we have in common. We look at the other side as an enemy and as the enemy. There is a difference between patriotism and nationalism. For nationalism, you need an enemy. So nationalism is a divisive force and a negative force, and Zionism, as one form of nationalism, is no exception. The Jewish philosopher Isaiah Berlin used to say that the Jews are like any other people, only more so. And by the same token, Zionism is like any other form of nationalism, only more so.
Let us look also at the genesis of the Palestine Liberation Organization, if we may, and then the role of Yasser Arafat, and also the Oslo Accords, Professor, because I wonder what was ever gained by that.
Yasser Arafat was the leader of the Palestinian resistance, and any nation under occupation generates a resistance movement, and the Palestinians are no exception to that. And the core of the Arab-Israeli conflict was the Palestinian issue. There were two nations, two peoples, and one land. This is what the conflict is essentially about, a clash between two national movements. Now, the Palestinian resistance movement, the PLO, gradually moderated its demands. In 1988, the Palestine National Council passed a series of crucial resolutions. They accepted Israel's right to exist. They accepted all UN resolution relating to the conflict going back to 1947, and they agreed to renounce terror. And this is a revolution in Palestinian thinking. But there was no one to talk to on the Israeli side until the Likud was replaced by Labour under Yitzhak Rabin in 1992. And Yitzhak Rabin was the first Israeli leader to go forward towards the Palestinians on the political front and to offer a political horizon. And this took the form of the Oslo Accord of 1993. And I remember that at the time I was euphoric, but it was not to be. And the Oslo Accord turned out to be not a prelude to Palestinian independence, but a trap for the Palestinians. Rabin was assassinated. Likud came back to power under Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996, and Netanyahu immediately proceeded to dismantle and to subvert the Oslo Accords and to assert Jewish claim to the whole of historic Palestine. And this is where we are today.
Correct.
Total rejection of any Palestinian national rights.
But wouldn't you say now in hindsight that the settler colonial project is at complete loggerheads with the two-state solution in any case?
Since June 1967, Israel faced a basic choice. It could have peace with its neighbors, or it could have land. And by its actions, Israel demonstrated clearly that it preferred land to peace.
How much land do they want? East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel? Or do they want what is they say has been promised to them in the Old Testament, which is all the land from the Nile to the Euphrates? How much land do they now want?
Depends who you ask. And in the present government, there are ministers who are extreme, who are messianic, and who want lay a claim to and hope that Israel would also take over the east bank of the Jordan, not just the west bank. But let's look at the policy of the present government. It's defined in the policy guidelines that this government presented to the Knesset, and the guidelines say the Jewish people has exclusive right to sovereignty over the whole land of Israel. And the land of Israel includes the West Bank, which they prefer to call Judea and Samaria. So this is the position of the government, a total denial of any Palestinian rights anywhere in historic Palestine. And the agenda, the end game of the extremists in this government who really set the tone is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the West Bank and the formal annexation of the West Bank. That's the agenda of the present government.
We know that Arab states have fought with Israel, then collaborated with it, then fought it again, supported the PLO, then dumped it. Then some states have quietly supported Hamas, then dumped it. What do the Arabs want, the other Arab states? What do they want? And why does it feel like they actually fear a Palestinian state in their midst?
Since the Arab League was formed in 1945, the central issue has been the Palestine question. And since 1945, there's always been a gap between the rhetorical level and the operational level of Arab policy towards this issue. At the rhetorical level, it was full support for the Palestinians, and in fact, 1948, a promise to liberate Palestine. But at the operational level, each Arab country pursues its own national interest, and the losers are the Palestinians. There is one historic landmark. In 2002, the Arab League met in Lebanon, in Beirut, and issued what became known as the Arab Peace Initiative. The Arab Peace Initiative offered Israel peace and normalization with all 22 members of the Arab League in return for the end of occupation and a Palestinian state on the Gaza and the West Bank with a capital city in East Jerusalem. This is the deal of the century, and yet Israel has dismissed the Arab Peace Initiative, has refused to engage with it, and continued with the policy of the creeping annexation of the West Bank. In 2020, the 4 Arab states, led by the United Arab Emirates, signed peace agreements with Israel, the so-called Abraham Peace Accords. And I don't regard the Abraham Peace Accords as genuine peace agreements. Rather, they are transactions between authoritarian Arab leaders and an apartheid state. The Abraham Peace Accords represented a victory for Benjamin Netanyahu because he always claimed that Israel can make peace agreements with the Sunni Arab states without making any concessions to the Palestinians. And here he seemed to be vindicated. And indeed, the Palestinians regarded the Abraham Accords as a stab in the back to them, because it meant a complete going back on the Arab Peace Initiative. So the logical, only reasonable Arab position on this conflict is summarized in the Abraham Peace Accord. The Arabs should insist, in return for peace, Israel must end the occupation. But they haven't insisted on that. In the last 2 years, when Israel has been committing genocide in Gaza, the Arabs have been totally silent.
The street in the Muslim Arab world is very cynical and deeply upset about what is happening in Palestine. Most people that one talks to understand what happened on the 7th of October 2 years ago. You have written about this in Genocide in Gaza. I want to ask you, Professor, when did you realize that it was actually a genocide?
The turning point for me was when Israel suspended, stopped all international aid, humanitarian aid to the Strip. So here Israel started using starvation as a weapon of war. And if you are starving people to death, that's genocide. And also what Israel has been doing in Gaza for the last 2 years completely fits the definition of the 1948 Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of Genocide. It defines what is genocide, and what Israel does fits completely this definition. And the irony is that the 1948 Convention was passed in order to stop what happened to the Jews under Nazi Germany during the Second World War. And today it's the Jewish state which is perpetrating genocide in Gaza. And the great tragedy is that the Western powers, especially Britain and America, are not just complicit in genocide, they are active partners in genocide, and the Arab rulers are completely silent in the face of this annihilation of the Palestinian people.
Professor, what do you think is the real count of the dead and the displaced in Gaza?
The official count is 70,000 dead. But that is a huge underestimate because we don't know how many bodies lay within the rubble. And we know that 80% of the casualties are women and children. We know that Israel has killed over 20,000 children and made 40,000 children orphans. In other words, they lost either one or both parents. And there is a new expression, a macabre expression, about which is injured child, no surviving family. In a very real sense, this has been a war on children. And Israel boasts that the IDF is the most moral army in the world. But if you look at the record of what they've done, raining death and destruction on the people of Gaza, then I think they have a claim to be the most sadistic and cruel army in the world.
Do you think that it's the killing of children that has been the thing that has influenced all these wonderful people who come out to demonstrate against Israeli actions?
There is utter revulsion against what Israel is doing. And the most upsetting aspect of Israeli atrocities is the cruelty towards children. So that certainly motivates anger with Israel. But that's not the only aspect of Israeli behavior in Gaza that arouses such strong hostility. It's the whole range of Israeli measures in Gaza. And Israel is guilty of so many sins. The destruction of Israel is guilty of domicide, the destruction of the homes. It's destroyed over 80% of the houses and civilian infrastructure in Gaza. Israel is guilty of econocide, of destroying the economy, of ecocide, destroying the environment. Israel is guilty of cultural genocide by bombing libraries, archives, bookshops, cultural centers, and historic sites to erase the history of Gaza. And Israel is guilty of scholasticide, which is the destruction of the educational system, which is of particular interest to me as an academic. Israel has damaged or destroyed 512 schools. Israel has bombed or destroyed all 12 universities in Gaza. So this is part of a systematic policy of destroying the educational system in Gaza. Israel has been killing doctors and nurses and health staff, but also bombed medical schools so that the Palestinians cannot train a new generation. And this is all part of a deliberate policy of genocide, of annihilating the Palestinian people. It's a crying injustice. The Western powers continue to support Israel. The Arab rulers are silent. That is why people are so angry with both Israel and its supporters. That's why so many people in London take part in demonstrations, which includes my wife and my daughter and myself. We go on these demonstrations to make our voices heard. And interestingly, in these demonstrations, there is 1,000 strong Jewish bloc. Jews who march in solidarity with the Palestinians, and more Jews around the world are saying, not in our name.
Not in our names, not in our name. So, Professor, let me conclude this by asking you, where do you think this will end? What do you think will be the lasting impact of what we have seen so tragically unfold before our eyes?
I'm pessimistic in the short run. There is the Trump peace plan for Gaza, which isn't a peace plan. It's a colonial document. It's the sequel to the Balfour Declaration and the British mandate in Palestine. It denies any agency to the Palestinians. It's an international board which will dictate what will happen in Gaza, without allowing the Palestinians any agency or any say in their own future. But I am more optimistic in the long term because I believe that apartheid in the 21st century is not sustainable. And in the end, Israel will go down the route of apartheid South Africa. The last two countries to support apartheid South Africa were America and Israel. And I predict that the last country to support apartheid in Israel would be America. But there is a global grassroots movement, BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, for ending the occupation. And it's a non-violent movement, and all its main demands are enshrined in international law. And this civil society movement is gaining traction, and the governments, the Western governments, are under pressure from the people to change the policies. And in the end, it would be not reform from within Israel, there is no impulse for change inside Israel. It will be external pressure that would force Israel to change. And I honestly believe there will be justice for the Palestinians at the end of the road. And my vision for the future is one state from the river to the sea with equal rights for all its citizens, regardless of religion and ethnicity.
We all look forward to seeing that great day. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.